This is message number 8 in my Endtime Babylon series. It is entitled Evaluating Various Views of Endtime Babylon. This will be one of the more longer messages of this series. This is because, as I have said before, you can explain biblical truth in a paragraph really well, but it requires pages to refute biblical error. Messages number 1 through 7 of the Endtime Babylon series have provided a careful exegesis of the biblical prophecy in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. As a result, the following 12 primary attributes of Endtime Babylon have been demonstrated. 1. It will be the economic superpower of the world, possessing great wealth when the end times begin. 2. Its international businessmen will be the world's important people. 3. It will be the foremost consumer and importer of material goods in the world because all who had ships in the sea became rich through her wealth. 4. Its people will be living in extravagant luxury. 5. It will be the world's foremost example and promoter of the worship of money. 6. Endtime Babylon will be the world's foremost nation. 7. Endtime Babylon will be the Gentile world's foremost spiritual prostitute. 8. Endtime Babylon will be the world's foremost moral corrupter. 9. Endtime Babylon will be the world's foremost technology power. 10. Endtime Babylon will be the world's foremost military power. 11. Endtime Babylon will be the world's foremost mixture and uniter of people. 12. Endtime Babylon will be all of the above, centered and concentrated in one literal and physical city. It has also been abundantly demonstrated that America, centered in New York City, is the only nation and city that fulfills these 12 biblical attributes of Endtime Babylon. No other interpretations or applications of this prophecy even come close to matching its biblical attributes compared to the attributes of America. In fact, the weaknesses of alternative explanations serve to strengthen and confirm that Endtime Babylon will be America. Unfortunately, modern and scholarly attempts to interpret Revelation chapter 17 through 18 is a confusing and contradictory jungle of literature. In message number 1, the most common views on the identity of Endtime Babylon were introduced. Some aspects of these views have been addressed in previous messages. Here, they will be dealt with more fully. Perhaps the most popular view throughout church history and today is that Endtime Babylon is a spiritual metaphor for the anti-God world. In previous messages, it was noted that a metaphorical interpretation of Revelation 17 through 18 is necessary to explain some of the worldwide attributes of Endtime Babylon. However, most insist the metaphorical view is the only view necessary and that Revelation 17:18 is not predicting anything physical or literal for the future. If they do suggest such a thing, the physical and literal aspects of Endtime Babylon are greatly diminished. Again, all of this ignores the biblical and historical precedent of God to fulfill his prophecies, which are promises, in a physical and even literal way. As noted in message number 2, we should expect a biblical prophecy to be fulfilled in a physical way by a person, place, or event. This rule of interpretation is generally denied or diminished in amillennialism, popular amillennialism. Unfortunately, amillennialism seems to completely ignore how God has fulfilled biblical prophecy in the past. Old Testament scholar J.B. Payne has provided what is probably the most detailed study of biblical prophecy available. In his Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy, he identified 592 Old Testament and New Testament prophecies that have already been fulfilled in human history. Every single one of these almost 600 biblical prophecies was fulfilled in a physical way by a person, place, or event. None of these prophecies were fulfilled in merely a metaphorical or spiritualized way. This is true even in the many instances when God communicated a biblical prophecy in metaphorical language. Metaphorical interpreters need to be asked, when did God abandon his repeated practice of fulfilling biblical prophecy in a physical way? Contrary to the popular metaphorical view, God has not changed the way he will fulfill biblical prophecy. Unfortunately, much of the church today is only focused on the metaphorical meaning of Revelation chapter 17 through 18. However, when the prophecies of Endtime Babylon's physical destruction are being fulfilled, no one will care at all about its metaphorical meaning, and only its physical meaning will have any value, which is why its physical meaning is the focus of the book and the materials in Endtime Babylon. Every single biblical prophecy in human history was fulfilled in either a literal or physical person, place, or event. The prophecies in Revelation chapter 17 through 18 will not be an exception. Therefore, Endtime Babylon's metaphorical meaning does not exhaust the literal and physical meaning of the prophecy. The above is one reason why many evangelical scholars suggest that Revelation chapter 17 through 18 should be interpreted in at least a couple of different layers. One, a worldwide metaphorical view, and two, a more physical, even literal interpretation to be fulfilled in the future. This is also the view demonstrated in my book, Endtime Babylon. However, at the time of this writing, there is not a single notable or influential Bible scholar or teacher in America that would claim America is the best interpretation of the physical and literal aspect of Endtime Babylon. In fact, in all the commentaries on Revelation that have been consulted in the writing of Endtime Babylon, not a single one of them even suggests America as a possibility. In light of the 12 primary biblical attributes of Endtime Babylon carefully derived from Revelation chapter 17 through 18 and Jeremiah chapters 50 through 51, the absence of any mention of America in any of these evangelical studies on the topic seems to reveal a distorting bias. Next, we can discuss the common view that Endtime Babylon is first century Rome or Jerusalem and Israel. Some see virtually all biblical prophecy being fulfilled in the past or present. Such views put relatively little importance on the literal and future aspects of biblical prophecy. Some promoters of this view think Endtime Babylon was fulfilled in first century Rome. This is a common interpretation, especially among more liberal scholars who doubt the Bible's ability to predict the future. Their focus is on the fact that Endtime Babylon is described as 7 hills on which the woman sits, Revelation 17:9, which is an obvious reference to Rome. Indeed, as discussed in the previous message, the first century city and empire of Rome was obviously a partial fulfillment of the attributes of Endtime Babylon. However, the fundamental error of this view is the complete ignoring of the obvious, near partial, and final complete nature of how many biblical prophecies have been and will be fulfilled. Therefore, such views have little value in helping us understand the much more important future, literal, final, and complete fulfillment of biblical prophecies. There's one more reason that Rome is not a fulfillment of the prophecy in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. It is described throughout Scripture as one of the historical beast kingdoms that were servants of Satan from their very beginnings. Daniel chapter 7 and 2 can describe that. But as explained earlier, Endtime Babylon will be a spiritual prostitute, suggesting it began as a nation with a unique relationship with God. That was never true of ancient Rome. More recently, some have claimed Revelation chapter 17 through 18 was already fulfilled in first century Jerusalem and Israel, or will be in the future. The primary reason is that, like Endtime Babylon, both are described as spiritual prostitutes in Scripture. However, this view falters for several reasons. First, Endtime Babylon is most clearly described as a worldwide economic power. Israel has never been this, and it seems very unlikely it will ever be that until Christ's return. Then, in the millennial kingdom, Israel will exercise the kind of worldwide influence described in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. In addition, as pointed out in the previous message, the capital city of Endtime Babylon will be a major seaport. Jerusalem will probably never be that. Finally, there's a difference between Jerusalem and Endtime Babylon that clearly differentiates them. Contrary to amillennialism, Jerusalem is always promised forgiveness and eternal restoration. But Endtime Babylon is promised condemnation and complete and everlasting destruction. Jerusalem is never described as being depopulated for eternity. Endtime Babylon is, Revelation chapter 17 through 16 and 16. Therefore, it is the woman in Revelation 12 that depicts Israel, not Revelation 17. In fact, it would seem there's an intentional contrast between them. Next, some have proposed that Endtime Babylon will be a future worldwide government brought about by the Antichrist. Something like the United Nations is an example of this interpretation. In this view, the Antichrist eventually takes over this one world government for his own means to exercise his authority over the earth. The United Nations is certainly a force in this world to promote the anti-God world. And as noted in the previous message, the existence of the UN's headquarters in New York City makes this city the world center for international diplomacy. Therefore, it seems to be another reason to see this city as a center for the anti-God world and the capital of Endtime Babylon. But there are several problems with confining the prophecies in Revelation 17 through 18 to just a political entity like the diplomatic organization of the United Nations, or seeing its power and influence as occurring through a one-world political government. First, there are no clear allusions in Revelation 17 through 18 to suggest that end-time Babylon's influence will be primarily through a political power. True, the prophecy states it will be the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, Revelation 17:18. But this is referring to its economic power, not political power. Accordingly, when end-time Babylon is destroyed, the world's political leaders do not celebrate some sort of freedom from a political power or mourn the loss of a one-world government. Rather, the kings of the earth will mourn because they enjoyed her sinful and worldly luxury that end-time Babylon's wealth provided them. The kings of the earth will be voluntarily ruled by end-time Babylon's idolatrous religion of money, not so much as political power. Accordingly, New Testament scholar Thomas Edgar writes, quote, although there are statements indicating a position of influence and leadership, such as Revelation 17:18, the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth, this leadership is not stated to be political. Chapter 18 of Revelation describes the details regarding the city, but the bulk of the chapter deals directly with commercial or economic aspects. There is no verse in the prophecy clearly reflecting a political sense as in governmental control, unquote. Second, the United Nations is not the economic, cultural, or military superpower of the world as predicted of end-time Babylon. Third, it would be hard to interpret the United Nations as a great spiritual prostitute, having once belonged to and served God and now the most influential moral corrupter in the world. What about Europe or China? Those who read my book could conclude that the European Union could be end-time Babylon. This is not a popular view among Christians, though. The popular focus on the European Union has been to prove it is the 10-nation end-time coalition that Scripture actually predicts will be destroying end-time Babylon, not becoming end-time Babylon. However, let it be said that it is possible that Europe and the European Union will be a part of end-time Babylon. It certainly is relatively wealthy, worldly, and immoral. Because the roots of the Protestant Reformation formed there, it could be argued that these countries are also spiritual prostitutes. There are certainly centers of commerce and shipping in Europe like London. So let it be repeated, it is possible that Europe will be included in fulfilling the prophecies about end-time Babylon. But there are some reasons to doubt this. First, it will be argued in the following chapters that the destruction of end-time Babylon will occur through nuclear weapons. If a country like Russia is part of the 10-nation end-time coalition that attacks end-time Babylon, as argued in my previous book, The Beginning of Birth Pains, then it may deem the nuclear destruction of Europe as endangering itself. But using nuclear weapons to destroy a country like America that is separated by entire oceans from Russia and China does not as clearly place those countries in danger. Secondly, since Brexit and Great Britain's exit from the European Union, the EU's economic power as a whole has been severely diminished, as has its unity. Those who have thought the EU is prophesied in Scripture to play some major role in the end times should take notice of such a diminishing event for the future of the European Union. Some might suggest China could possibly economically surpass America to such a degree that it would have the kind of economic superiority predicted of end-time Babylon. This can only be a guess. China is still a very long ways from America in terms of having lived in luxury and having enjoyed her great luxury as prophesied in Revelation chapter 18. We should not ignore the fact that a people in place clearly matching the attributes of the prophecy in Revelation chapter 17 through 18 already exists today. Also, again, end-time Babylon is repeatedly described as a spiritual prostitute, which at one time served and worshiped God. This is not true of China. Next, we can address the popular interpretation end-time Babylon will be a worldwide false religion, perhaps Roman Catholicism, Islam, New Age, or a future religion that does not exist today. As noted above, many evangelical scholars have believed that there are two layers of meaning for end-time Babylon. On one hand, it will be a literal city-nation. But in a metaphorical sense, it will be something influencing the entire world. In message number 5, it was demonstrated that the worldwide idolatrous religion practiced and promoted by end-time Babylon will be the worship of money, which is why America is the best candidate for the superior source, center, and promoter of this religion. However, others want to suggest end-time Babylon's religion will be a formal ecclesiastical religion that does not exist today. These are the same Christians who are alarmed by an ecumenical efforts between Protestants and Roman Catholicism or any other religions. Bible teacher John MacArthur represents this and his view well when he writes, quote, during the end times, all the world's diverse religions, like Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., will be reunited into one great world religion. That ultimate expression of false religion would be an essential element of Antichrist's final world empire in holding together his military, economic, and political structure. Only religion can unite the world in the most compelling way, MacArthur claims. Politics, economics, even military force are unable to overcome the world's cultural diversity, unquote. In MacArthur's view, the Antichrist is going to build Endtime Babylon and its worldwide religion for his own purposes. But even the Antichrist is going to destroy that religion. Commenting on Revelation chapter 17, verse 16, which describes the Antichrist's destruction of Endtime Babylon, John MacArthur writes, quote, Antichrist's alliance with the false religious system will not last. Eventually, the 10 horns, the 10 kings who rule under Antichrist, and the beast, Antichrist himself, will come to hate the harlot. Having used the false religious system to help him gain control of the world, Antichrist will discard it. In his rampant egotism, he will want the world to worship only him. Thus he will turn on the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. That graphic language of extreme violence is used to make clear that Antichrist and his henchmen will utterly and completely obliterate all vestiges of the false religious system, unquote. Therefore, this seems to be the popular interpretation of Revelation 17:18 as promoted by MacArthur and others. This is a complicated topic, so I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. But this is a popular belief about Revelation chapter 17 through 18. 1, during the end times, perhaps at its beginning, the Antichrist will work to form an alliance of all world religions with him. It will be a formal ecclesiastical religion. 2, initially, the Antichrist and Endtime Babylon's religion will have a congenial, friendly relationship. 3, however, Endtime Babylon's religion will be merely aligned with the Antichrist, but not a religion specifically worshiping him. This religion will possess great wealth and be a distraction from Antichrist's eventual goal to have all the worship in the world. 4th, because of this, Antichrist will eventually destroy the religion he helped to form so that he alone will be worshipped. Now, those who have read the previous book, The Beginning of Birth Pains, will recognize that the above scenario reflects much that was taught there, but in a distorted form. There would seem to be some subtle but important errors in this view. Based on The Beginning of Birth Pains and this book, Endtime Babylon, the following scenario has been argued for. 1, before the end times begin, Endtime Babylon will arise as the economic, cultural, and military superpower of the world, represented by a literal nation and centered in a city. It will promote the idolatrous worship of wealth, which can be considered a religion. 2, it will not be the Antichrist who helps to form Endtime Babylon or its religion. Its formation will be empowered by humanity's sinful nature, which pursues the values of the anti-God world ruled by Satan. 3rd, with the opening of the first seal, described in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 2, the Antichrist will be miraculously resurrected from the dead, form his religious covenant with many, and implement his religion, as explained in Revelation chapter 13. 4th, Antichrist and Satan will rather immediately desire the full and more direct worship of the world. The worship of wealth practiced and promoted by Endtime Babylon all over the world will be a hindrance to that. And finally, therefore, the Antichrist and the 10-nation end-time coalition will destroy the people, place, and wealth of Endtime Babylon. Therefore, it seems MacArthur and others are correct on some basic ideas here. Endtime Babylon will represent a religion that will hinder the fuller and more direct worship that the Antichrist and Satan will desire. This explains why the Antichrist will hate Endtime Babylon and destroy it. But MacArthur assumes some fundamental things in his scenario that do not seem supported in Scripture. First is that there will be some sort of congenial and mutually aligned relationship between the Antichrist and Endtime Babylon, which will be essential in Endtime Babylon's formation. As demonstrated in message number 3, however, biblical prophecy only describes an adversarial relationship between them. The description of a woman sitting on top of and riding on top of the beast, Revelation chapter 17, verses 3 and 7, refers to Endtime Babylon's suppression of the Antichrist, not some sort of mutually beneficial relationship. MacArthur's view depends on a friendly relationship between the Antichrist and Endtime Babylon that is nowhere mentioned in Scripture. A second error is MacArthur's claim that a formal ecclesiastical religion could, quote, unite the world in the most compelling way, unquote. On the contrary, the idolatrous worship of wealth is a much more powerful religion than the ecumenical religion MacArthur has in mind. Money is the universal religion and desire of all pagan humanity throughout all of history. Even Jesus said so in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, which we've talked about previously, which is why the almost universal desire and dependence on money is the best candidate for the worldwide idolatrous religion being described in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. Accordingly, when Endtime Babylon is destroyed, it will not be religious leaders who will be mourning. The prophecy says the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys her cargoes anymore, Revelation 18:11. And all who earn their living from the sea will be weeping and mourning. Nor does the prophecy say it will be Endtime Babylon's religious leaders who will be the world's important people, Revelation 18:23. It will be Endtime Babylon's international businessmen who will be the world's important people, not its priests. The religion of Endtime Babylon will be wealth, not a formal ecclesiastical religion. There's one more confusing thing about MacArthur's view. He writes regarding Revelation 17:16, that graphic language of extreme violence is used to make clear that Antichrist and his henchmen will utterly and completely obliterate all vestiges of the false religious system, unquote. On the contrary, the prophecy predicts the depopulation of the people living in a city and nation, not destroying a religion. And in MacArthur's view, how would the Antichrist completely burn down with fire a religion? A related approach to the view that Endtime Babylon is an ecclesiastical religion is the claim that it will be the Roman Catholic Church. Today, this is a relatively minor view, especially among Bible scholars. However, this was the predominant view of the Protestant Reformation in the 1700s. Martin Luther was especially vocal and dogmatic on this view. Accordingly, it was even stated in the Westminster Confession. This view may have been more understandable in that time when Roman Catholicism was especially heretical, sinful, idolatrous, killing real Christians, and wealthier than most kings. The Roman Catholic Church could certainly be considered a spiritual prostitute. Accordingly, the picture of the woman sitting on the seven hills of Rome could be interpreted as the Vatican. But the Roman Catholic Church is not the economic, cultural, and military superpower in this world that Endtime Babylon will be, nor will it ever be. America is far superior in all of Endtime Babylon's attributes than the Roman Catholic Church. I address and refute other arguments regarding this in the book. Another popular religion that has been suggested to explain Revelation chapter 17 through 18 is Islam. This view has become particularly popular with its increase in terrorism. But notice that the religion being described in Revelation 17 through 18 is one that the world is very willingly and wholeheartedly pursuing. Can you really imagine the whole world embracing Islam in that way? The same problems disprove the idea of some that New Age will be the one world religion described in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. This view was especially popular in the 1960s and 70s when there was a growing interest in New Age and the occult in America. But this view falters for the same reasons given above. Next, let us address the popular opinion that Endtime Babylon will be a future rebuilt city of Babylon in the country of Iraq. This view has been held by many evangelical scholars. Again, MacArthur is typical of this view, which he agrees with when he writes, quote, some of those who view the great city as an actual city identify it as Rome, others as Jerusalem. But the angel quite clearly and repeatedly refers to Babylon on the Euphrates throughout Revelation chapter 17 through 18. Thus, a rebuilt city of the ancient city of Babylon in Iraq will be closely identified with Antichrist's world empire, perhaps as its capital city. That city will be the center of his kingdom, the extent of which will be the whole earth, unquote. The strength of this view is that at least it is interpreting Revelation 17 through 18 in a literal and future sense. As pointed out in the previous message, Endtime Babylon is referred to as a physical and literal city 9 times in Revelation. The view that Endtime Babylon will be in Iraq seemed to have some support in the 1980s when Saddam Hussein spent over $500 million in his attempts to reconstruct the city and build a modern residence on the ruins of Nebuchadnezzar's ancient palace. But Saddam's efforts were stopped when American forces invaded Iraq in 2003 and Saddam was executed. More recently, some have claimed that efforts to make the site of Babylon a tourist attraction is solid evidence that these activities are fulfilling Revelation chapter 17 through 18. However, there are several reasons that a rebuilt Babylon on its ancient site in Iraq will not be Endtime Babylon. First, it seems impossible that such a location could become the economic, cultural, and military superpower of the world. What is the probability that the site of ancient ruins in the Iraqi desert will become an economic and cultural powerhouse that rivals what New York City has been for decades in our world? That is the same probability that those claiming this is the correct interpretation of Endtime Babylon are correct, and the probability is virtually nil. Second, most advocates of this view claim Antichrist will build such a city after coming to power. But that view seems to completely ignore several things. First, there's no hint in Scripture that the Antichrist will build Endtime Babylon. The clearest description is that he will hate and destroy it. This is because Endtime Babylon will be a rival to Antichrist's desire to be fully worshipped in the world. These facts are precisely why the Antichrist will destroy Endtime Babylon after his rise to power. Therefore, contrary to popular interpretations, the Antichrist is not going to build Endtime Babylon as the power center of the world and then destroy it. Second, it was demonstrated in message number 3 that Endtime Babylon will exist when the end times begin and before Antichrist is ruling the world. In addition, the biblical sequence, duration, and nature of end-time events will not allow opportunity for the Antichrist to rebuild Babylon in the Iraqi desert to be the economic, cultural, military, and political capital of the world. There are more problems with the common view that the Antichrist will build Babylon in Iraq after coming to power. First, Iraq could never be considered a spiritual prostitute in the biblical sense, as is Israel and America. Iraq's roots and beginning as a nation were pagan, not Judeo-Christian. Finally, as discussed in the previous message, a rebuilt Babylon could never be the thriving seaport that Endtime Babylon will be. It is located over 300 miles from the Persian Gulf. Accordingly, it is again suggested that there is a distorting bias operating when so many Bible scholars who actually live in the economic, cultural, military, and sinful superpower of America still are confidently claiming Endtime Babylon will be in the desert of Iraq. How convenient. Once again, by far the best interpretation of Revelation chapter 17 through 18 is that Endtime Babylon is America, the spiritual prostitute and the economic, cultural, and military superpower of the world centered in New York City. The major views on Revelation chapter 17 through 18 have been addressed above. Some of them have some of the attributes described in the prophecy, but none of them even come close to fulfilling all of the biblical attributes of Endtime Babylon. There's only one entity in this world that does. America, again, the spiritual prostitute and economic, cultural, and military superpower of the world, all centered in New York City. However, as noted, it must be admitted that scholarly support in the church for this view is scarce. In the book, I note several authors that generally support the view argued in my book, Endtime Babylon, but it is doubtful that you have ever heard of any of these authors. For example, S. Franklin Logsdon was one of the most popular and respected Christian authors in America in the 1950s and 60s. He was the pastor of the influential Moody Bible Church in Chicago. In 1968, he published a small booklet entitled, Is the USA in Prophecy? It was not well received and has long been out of print. But Logsdon concluded his study of Revelation chapters 17 through 18 and Jeremiah chapters 50 through 51 by asking this question, quote, to what other nation of all time could these divinely given characteristics and descriptions so convincingly apply other than America? More recently, Edward Tracy has written in his book, The United States in Prophecy, quote, if prophecy foretells the sudden destruction of the greatest world power of the end time, confident in its own invincibility, sitting as a queen among nations, reveling in luxuriousness, ease and wickedness, the envy of the world, having forsaken the truth of God for the idolatry of covetousness, and having spread its subtle form of idolatry throughout the world, intoxicating all nations with the wine of her fornication. Moreover, if prophecy depicts the destruction of a nation comparatively recent in its origin, and one is composed of all nationalities of the world, and if this destruction is said to come in one day and 1 hour, further, if this destruction is of such a startling and unexpected nature as to cause astonishment and alarm among the inhabitants of the earth, together with sorrow and weeping, as if this destruction is said to leave her ultimately without an inhabitant and unapproachable to sympathetic onlookers, and finally, if the vast commercial interests of the world which lived deliciously on her delicacies and were made rich by her trade are made to mourn, what scriptural reason have we to believe that this is anything short of prophecy, which outlines the total and irreparable desolation, destruction, and dissolution of our own nation, the United States of America, unquote. Again, I note several more authors who have come to the same conclusion in my book and comment on some of them. Unfortunately, most of these books are not very good. I hope to correct that in my book, Endtime Babylon. I have diligently searched to find biblical arguments that refute the views shared in my book. Especially in the endnotes, there is a rather detailed effort to interact with the best evangelical commentaries and resources available on these scriptures. But the conclusion stated at the beginning of this message stands. Based on the 12 attributes of end-time Babylon, carefully derived from the text of Revelation chapter 17 through 18 and Jeremiah chapters 50 through 51, America, centered in New York City, is the only reasonable modern application of what the prophecy in Revelation 17 through 18 is predicting. In fact, the weaknesses of alternative explanations serve to strengthen and confirm that end-time Babylon is America. Therefore, it seems reasonable to conclude there is an 85% probability that America will fulfill the biblical prophecies of end-time Babylon. Most may view that level of probability too high. However, they probably will not have a better suggestion of who and what Revelation 17 through 18 is describing, nor will they be able to refute the biblical arguments offered in my book. Some may wonder why the suggested probability is not higher than 85%. This is because, as explained in my previous book, no mere human can be 100% certain of every aspect of their interpretation of a biblical prophecy as complex as Revelation chapter 17 through 18 until that prophecy is actually fulfilled. Which is why most will not try very hard to understand this prophecy. But there are serious problems with that. First, the prophecy predicts the 10 horns that you saw, and the beast will hate the prostitute, and these will permanently remove all people from her and strip her naked, and they will completely devour her body and will burn her up with fire in 1 hour, such that no people will ever live there again. God is clearly telling us that the people in place of end-time Babylon will suffer destruction in a horrible physical way. Based on the biblical sequence of end-time events provided in the previous book, Christ's End Times Teaching, and in this book, it is certain that the church will be on the earth when end-time Babylon is destroyed, which is why there is a command from God in the prophecy. John writes, "Then I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Move out of Babylon the Great, my people, so that you will not be connected to her sins, so that you will not experience her being struck hard with a sudden and severe disaster.' This is because her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has focused his attention on her wrongs." Revelation 18, verses 4 through 5, in a suggested translation that I will support in a later message. Revelation 18:4 is clearly a command from God to Christians living in end-time Babylon to physically leave end-time Babylon in order to escape its physical destruction. Therefore, dear friends, if you want to be certain that you and your loved ones will not be painfully destroyed with the rest of the people in end-time Babylon, you need to decide what you believe about Revelation chapter 17 through 18. Getting it wrong could have the worst consequences imaginable for you, your family, and your church. Not only the tragedy of you and them experiencing such a horrible and unnecessary death, but something even worse, dying in disobedience to God's command. Which is why you need to work hard so you can present yourself to God and receive his approval. Be a good worker, one who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly explains the word of truth, including the word of truth in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. Perhaps you do not like the conclusions in my book, Endtime Babylon, regarding its identity. But what if you are wrong? As explained further in the next message, the consequences will be horrific. In fact, in the next message, I will describe biblical evidence that Endtime Babylon will be destroyed with nuclear weapons.